On
Okay.
another problem, he said we didn't have to graph it, so I didn't think we had to do that for the test or anything.
Oh, I hope not, because I was totally confused. Couldn't get it just right. It was frustrating. Graphs. Do we have to do graphs on the exam? Because a couple of the problems that we had required us to do a graph. And for some reason, I just couldn't get the dot to be exactly where it needed to be.
Yeah.
So,
You're asking me that question?
yes, sir.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
No graphs on the third exam.
All multiple choice from what I understand, right?
No.
Oh, excuse me just a second.
It's not all multiple choice?
No, ma'am, it's not.
Is it like a write-in, like fill in the blank?
We're gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to take over from the excitement of today. I think today will be a very spirited class. How's everyone doing? How are you doing? Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Thank you.
And to those who are not yet mothers, happy Mother's Day to your mother.
I'm a dog mom.
Well, happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all were able to enjoy your Mother's Day.
I made 2 layered German chocolate cakes.
That sounds delicious.
I
I
was
haven't had a German chocolate cake in so long. So it's like some sort of nuts in there, right?
pecan. Pecans. Chopped up into like the frosting.
Mm-hmm.
My grandpa didn't like the nuts. He said he has dentures, so it didn't agree with his dentures.
You said pecans, and that reminded me that I think it had to be in the month of March when I didn't think this was going to last long, as long as it has. I said, I'm going to do something nice for my mom. So I baked a pecan pie for my mom, and I took it over to her.
That sounds so good. That was on my list, but I already thought he didn't like nuts too much, so I didn't want to put big ones in there. So I was just going to do little ones, but he noticed anyway.
All right. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you to all of you who are here. We are getting ready for the third and final midterm. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So, if I'm correct me if I'm mistaken, but is it one midterm this week and then a final separately, or is it just combined?
So, so there's our third midterm, which is going to be on Wednesday. Which we're going to talk about, and then next week is finals week, and I am required to give you all a final. Normally, what I do in this class is I hold class, but I don't require you to show up. So then usually no one shows up because there's no reason why you would show up. And that way I go, well, that was the final. But what I'm going to do this time, just to make sure that I'm covering my bases, is that I am going to give a final exam that will be available online. It's going to be worth 1 point. And the question's going to be, the question's going to be, I don't know what the question's going to be, Maybe the question should be, which type of accounting helps managers make business decisions? And you'll have to choose between financial and managerial. So that's going to be your final exam.
Yeah,
And
perfect.
For your plug, man. Thank you.
if you choose not to take it, you will lose 1 point out of the 1,000 points that you have been accumulating in this class. And
I will take it.
if you take it, you're going to get 1 point out of the 1,000 points you were accumulating. So that's going to be your final exam. So no one can say I didn't give a final exam. So here we go. Let's talk about this third exam here. So the logistics, read as such. Okay. This one is just going to be on chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 11. So we'll be talking about budgeting and variances.
There's no chapter 12 on Metaton.
No,
Never did chapter 12. So.
yeah, no chapter 12.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
The exam's going to be on Wednesday, May the 13th, 2 days from now, per our syllabus. You will have 2 hours to complete the exam. Now, when I give this exam, this is the pretty much the same exam I give in class. This is it's pretty much the same exam that I give in the classroom, and it usually takes students somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes to complete the exam. Okay? So 2 hours is more than enough time. I'm really just accounting for technology challenges that you may encounter. You'll need a calculator. It's more for here in the class. Okay, there's going to be 31 multiple choice questions. And there are going to be 3 problems on preparing budgets. So 34 questions in total. 3 of them are going to be on preparing budgets. And these budgets, normally, you know how budgets build on each other, right? So if your sales budget isn't right, then your production budget can't be right. And then you're right. These budgets do not build on each other. They're going to be 3 budgets for 3 separate companies. Okay. So you have the latitude to make an error in one of them and then not have that duplicate itself into the other 2.
Will you be able to show us an example of such a problem on preparing budgets, like something similar to what would be on the exam?
Yes, the problems that were assigned on Wednesday, that big long one, that is if you know how to do that, then you'll do well on these problems.
Okay.
Would we be, because we can go back and like redo those problems, right? Even though like it's past due, just in case we need to practice.
Yes, I believe you have to go to results, review. Somebody tell me.
Result.
Yeah.
Results, and then you can get to it from that way. The exam will be delivered on My Accounting Lab. It is not going to be a proctored exam. So in other words, you take it whenever you like, not whenever you like. The exam will be available at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, and it needs to be completed by 10 p.m. on Wednesday. So just giving you some latitude in terms of when you think the best time to take the exam is for yourself on Wednesday. So you only have 2 hours. If you start at 8 a.m., it's going to cut you off at 10 a.m. If you start at 9 p.m., you're only going to get an hour to work on it, right? So coordinate your timing. I will be on Conference Zoom on Wednesday from 5:15 to 6:30 p.m. So if you're taking the exam during that time frame, you can ask me. You can log on to Conference Zoom and ask me questions.
So you won't be doing the 2-day stretch of it that we discussed like last time we met?
No, I'm not. But if someone has a specific need or a reason why they cannot complete it on Wednesday, reach out to me separately, and we can coordinate a time frame, a different time frame for you. But my hope is that everything can be done by Thursday morning when I wake up, so that I can start working on the final grades and finish everything. So I didn't want to keep extending it. Other questions?
Is the exam 200 points like the last midterm?
Yes, it'll be worth 200 points.
All right, so, and there will be 34 questions. So that would be like how many points for, just do the calculation for that, for each question?
Well, the problems are worth more than the multiple choice questions. I think that each problem is worth 3 points. I think. No, I don't know. I'll look at it. I'll have to get you that answer. I don't have that information right now.
Okay.
But the problems are worth more than it might be true. The problems are worth more than each individual multiple choice question. Other questions? Well, let's talk about what's going to be on the test. Budgets. We talked about a lot of budgets. You got your sales budget, your production budget, direct materials budget, direct labor budget, manufacturing overhead budget, budgeted income statement. And my good friend Shrek here tells me that we need to, that one is you want to know, how do you calculate these budgets, right? So what goes in to each one of these, what are the components that make up these budgets? You also want to know, what do these budgets tell managers? So as a manager, why would you be looking at this budget? What decision are you seeking to make by looking at one of these budgets? Questions? No questions. And there's more budgets. The cash collection budget, the cash payment budget, and then the combined cash budget, where we're thinking about, do we have a need for financing? Do we have a need for, is there a need for the company to get financing? And Gecko here says, you want to know, how do you calculate these? So what are the inputs that you need? And what do these budgets tell managers? So why would a manager be looking at the cash collection budget or the combined cash budget? This is I mean, this is more than a third, right, of the exam, because the 3 problems are on budgets as well. So I don't want to gloss over this. If there are outstanding questions that you have, I want to make sure that we take the time to answer them.
So for the, what do these budgets tell managers? Like, is there going to be a question of, what does this budget tell managers? Or like, how would a question regarding that look like?
It could be something like a manager wants to know how much raw materials he needs to purchase. Which budget should she look to?
Okay.
And what would the answer be?
Cash payment budget? No.
Production budget? Oh,
No. A manager wants to know how much direct materials she needs to purchase. Which budget should she look to?
Direct materials budget?
Direct materials budget. I think the last time I said raw materials, but yes, direct materials budget.
With you said there was 3 portions where you build your own budget, and you said they're not going to be like they're going to be for separate companies, so they're not going to be like based off of each other.
Yes.
Okay, so there's not going to be like at any point where like whatever numbers for sales budget is going to like affect the production budget type of thing, or any of that.
Well, the production budget is always impacted by the sales budget. But in the problem, if the problem's on production budget, it will tell you this is the sales budget.
Oh, okay. So it's gonna be very similar to like our homework assignments, like the way they give us the numbers and the way you have to input them.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? All right. Done with, oh, even more budgets, says the green M&M. Flexible budgets. So you want to know what's the difference between master budget and flexible budget. You also want to know, how do managers use the flexible budget? And, oh, that's it. Questions on flexible budgets? Okay. Let's talk about standard costs. So remember, the standard cost is the cost of the ideal cost of making a product. Okay. And it includes direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. And for purposes of the analysis that we do in these chapters, we take that overhead and we divide it between, or we separate it between fixed overhead and variable overhead. Gumby says that we should want to know, how do managers use the standard cost? He also says, how do you determine standard cost? So I believe that's asking, how do you calculate what the standard cost is going to be? And oh, that's all he had. All right. Pause there. Let you all ask away.
Well, how do we determine standard cost?
It's a good question. Anybody want to answer that?
Is this the one where you just dissect on like the materials that, or just like what we discussed in like the very beginning, where you just describe like the process of making us like a finished product? Or is this more advanced than that?
What you said sounded more advanced. This is asking for a calculation. So how do we calculate what our standard cost is going to be?
Multiply the quantity of like the direct material that you like need, and then you multiply by the price, and that's like your standard cost, and then you'll compare it to like your actual cost that you incur, and then that's when you use those like price and quantity variances. That's for direct material. I also have the direct labor one, which is the quantity times the cost. That's basically it.
So let's go back to direct materials. Subtract those last two things you just said, because that's the next thing that we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just quantity times price.
What's the standard quantity? Yep. So on average, how many wheels do you need to make a bicycle? And if you're realistic, it's more than 2, right? Well, if you're making 4 bicycles, then it should be 2. But if you're making 400,000 bicycles, chances are at least 3 or 4 bikes, at least 300 or 400 bikes, there's going to be a wheel that doesn't work, right? So it's going to be something more than 2.05, to whatever the number is, right? But that's our standard quantity. And then you're multiplying that by your standard costs. So what do we expect the wheels to cost? And that would be your direct material standard cost. Do something similar for direct labor. And then for, so then you have your direct materials, direct labor. For manufacturing overhead, that's when you have to do the 4 steps, where you're thinking about estimating total variable manufacturing overhead cost, selecting a cost driver, and estimating what the total amount of those hours or dollars will be, dividing step 1 by step 2 to get your variable manufacturing overhead rate. And then that variable manufacturing overhead rate is multiplied by the actual hours or actual dollars, whatever that cost driver was. And that's what gets recorded as your variable manufacturing overhead.
Would you let us know like ahead of time on like what the 3 budgets are going to be? Like, would you give us an idea of that, or is that like a surprise?
I don't have that right now.
Okay.
See if I can find it though. Are there other questions? All right, actual cost. Okay, so we have a standard cost, and then we have what actually happened. And so we still have the same 4 components, right? Direct materials, direct labor, fixed and variable overhead. And then Kermit the Frog tells us we should know the difference between standard cost and actual cost. So why is there a difference between what we thought it was going to cost and what it actually cost, right? So that's our variances. How do you determine actual costs? And I think that's all Kermit the Frog has to say. Yep. That's all he has to say about that. Ready to answer questions?
Determining actual cost, is that just dividing the number that you sold into your sales revenue? Or that's just what that's not the cost though, right?
That'd be the price.
The price.
Yeah, what did it cost us to make the product?
So we'd have to know what our cost of goods sold is to divide the units into the cost of goods sold. That would give us our actual costs.
No. So we want to find the actual cost for direct material, the actual cost for direct labor, and then our actual manufacturing overhead, our actual fixed overhead. So to find our, how do we find our actual direct material cost? Anyone know that?
The actual direct material cost would be like how much you actually produced and then what the actual price was. Right?
Yes.
Standard is
I was going in the opposite direction, but we can go that direction too. You look at, this is my total spend for direct materials. And now I'm comparing that to how much I actually produced. And I divide my total cost by my production to come up with my actual cost. And what Alyssa just described was going to go in the opposite direction. If she knows the actual cost and she knows, if she knows the actual cost per unit and she knows how many units she produced, then she can get the total cost.
Okay.
So that's direct material, direct labor looks the same. How do you get the actual variable manufacturing overhead rate?
Oh, we did that. Are we talking about like the variances, or are we still talking about just like how to find it?
How to find the actual rate. So we had our variable manufacturing overhead rate, right? The budget that we did from steps 1, 2, and 3. But how do we figure out what the actual rate was?
Is it just based on like how we allocated it, or based on like the numbers, based like hours and stuff like that?
Yep, you're getting there. So you look at your total variable manufacturing overhead that was spent, right? So this is our total variable manufacturing overhead. Total variable manufacturing overhead that we spent. And then you divide that by whatever your cost driver is. What was your actual cost driver? So our actual cost driver, say our cost driver were hours, the actual labor hours that we spent during this period was this amount, right? And so then you divide your total variable manufacturing overhead by your total direct labor hours, and that will give you your actual variable overhead rate. Questions? All right. Variances. So we talked about a couple different variances, the direct material variance and the direct labor variance kind of look similar to each other. The direct material variance, so at a high level, you're looking at the difference between what did we expect to spend based on the flexible budget versus what we actually spent. That's your direct materials variance. And then within that direct material variance, or we can take that difference and then break it out into two different components. How much of this difference is related to us paying more than what we had expected to pay for our raw materials? And how much of this difference is related to us using more or less than we had expected to use for each product? And there were some formulas on how to calculate the direct material price variance and the direct material quantity variance, which I do not have in front of me because I don't memorize this stuff. But someone can feel free to type it in the, if someone asks, you can ask in the chat, and I'm sure someone would be kind enough to respond to you. The direct labor variance works similar. This one is, so direct labor variance, a difference between our actual direct labor cost and what our flexible budget direct labor costs were. And then what we're doing is we're taking that difference, that variance, and again, separating it into two reasons. One would be our employees were more efficient than we expected. The other one would be we paid them less or more than what we expected to pay. What questions do you have about the direct materials variance and or the direct labor variance? Oh, I should tell you what Mike Wazowski wants you to know. He says you should know, how do you calculate each variance? And he also says, what does each variance tell you? Like we just talked about that, Mike. And, oh, is the variance favorable or unfavorable? So how do you know if it's a favorable variance?
If it helped save them money.
If it helps save the money?
Increases their operating income.
If it, say that again?
Increases their operating income.
Yes, if it increases their operating income, meaning it saved them money, meaning I spent less than what I thought I was going to spend, right? We're all saying the same thing. Then that would be a favorable variance. If it decreased your operating income, caused you to spend more money, then it's an unfavorable variance. And then we talked about some more variances. The variable overhead variance. And this one, you're looking at the difference between what we had expected to spend based on the flexible budget for variable overhead and what we actually spent. Again, this one gets broken down into efficiency. How efficient were we in when we said it would take us 6 machine hours to complete a product? Did it take us more or less than 6 machine hours, right? That's getting to the efficiency variance. The rate variance, when we said we can produce 1,000 products in 6,000 hours, and how much did we actually produce within that time frame? So what was our actual rate? Okay. So was it exactly $6 or was it more or less than that? Questions? And then I've got these ones heading in different directions because the fixed overhead budget variance tells us two separate things, right? So unlike the other three that we talked about, these don't get added together. One is just the budget variance, right? What's the difference between what we expect to spend versus what we actually spent? A small but important nuance is when you're going from your master budget to your flexible budget, your fixed overhead costs do not change because the fixed overhead costs are not based on volume, right? They're based, well, they're not based on volume up to a relevant range. So this is just the difference between what I expected to spend versus what I actually spent. The fixed overhead volume variance is looking at the difference between, was I able to, given the cost that I knew I was going to spend, was I more or less efficient? Okay. I gave that example of a meeting space and how many people can I cram into that room? Okay. It would be like, as I'm looking at my car, according to the website, can seat 5 people, okay? But it's usually one person in that car. So I am being less efficient with my fixed costs because I can put 2, 3, 4 other people in that car at the same cost that I'm using that for. What questions do you have? Oh, let me tell you what the Lucky Charm guy says. How do you calculate each variance? Again, if you don't know, you just drop it in the chat. Most of the people here aren't nice, but there's 2 people who are nice, and they'll respond to you. What does each variance tell you? Okay, which I think we just talked about. And there you go. Is it favorable or unfavorable? All right. Happy to take any and all questions.
For your equation for variable overhead variance, for the variable overhead efficiency variance, it says standard PVOH times estimated hours minus actual hours. What's the PVOH?
PVOH?
It's something variable overhead.
Predetermined.
Okay, got it.
Other questions? So Jared, I think you should also see a PFOH, which would be the predetermined fixed overhead rate. I'm using those acronyms correctly.
Yep.
All right. Oh, one last time. Okay. This is the Riddler. And the Riddler says, you should know the difference between a favorable variance and an unfavorable variance. Okay. What this guy is saying but not saying is that when you look at the the questions, it's going to say, what's the answer? Is the answer 500 variable or 500 unfavorable? Sorry, 500 favorable or 500 unfavorable? Or is it 800 favorable or 800 unfavorable? So you may be able to do your calculation right, but then you still have to decide, all right, I know the answer is 500, but is it favorable or unfavorable? Okay. So make sure you don't fall into that trap of rushing through this and getting the right answer on your scratch paper, but then not being able to select the right answer online. Let's see. Questions? Oh, okay. So this is chapter 12, but we're not testing on chapter 12. Sure would have been nice though. All right. Who is this talking? Oh, this is the Green Lantern. Okay. Sorry, sir. All right. And that takes me to the end. So what